Hi there, we're about to start. We only have one person logged in right now, but we had almost 25 signed up. So we'll probably have people logging on late. Oh, we got one more. Yay, hello, welcome. We're starting at noon exactly. So we still have 4 minutes and then we'll pop on. And just so you know, we are also live on Facebook today. You'll see our faces in 4 minutes. Okay, 2 minute heads up, Amanda and I, because I'm Cassandra, we're gonna pop on and get started in 2 minutes. Hey, I got it figured out.
All right.
Oh gosh, we lost the screen share. Here we go. All right. Hello, welcome to the webinar. Thanks, Amanda, for popping on. For those of you who are already logged on, you might have seen everything go blank for a second. I unplugged the Ethernet cable. So right as we're about to start, I made the brilliant decision to cut off the internet. So anyway, we're back on. So we're also streaming live on Facebook right now.
Hey.
Yeah, and this is a first for us, and hopefully it'll work out and we'll keep doing it. So I'll introduce myself, let Amanda introduce herself, and I'm just going to quickly give you an intro. We're going to be talking about zero waste today. And the title of the webinar is Shop and Swap. So we'll be talking about different ways you can swap out things you already buy or use for things that don't create waste. But we also spent a little time talking about what it means, what zero waste means. So with that said, we are the Central Vermont Solid Waste Management District, and we do a lot of programming around reducing waste, recycling, composting, hazardous waste, all of that. And this is one of my personal favorites. Lastly, kudos to Amanda, who developed this webinar. This is one of her last projects in her service term with us as an EcoAmericorps member. So Amanda, take it away.
So my name is Amanda Clement. So as Cassandra said, I am the EcoAmericorps member for the district until tomorrow. So we are doing this webinar mainly because we think that there's a lot of important aspects to reducing waste that aren't necessarily just involved in composting and recycling. So we're going to talk a lot about that in this webinar and how to think around things.
All right, let's get to it. We know it's lunch break for a lot of people. I'm just realizing, there we go. Okay, so just quickly to overview what we're going to talk about today. We came up with what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 R's. You've heard of reduce, reuse, recycle. Well, in the zero waste world, you go way beyond that. And as I was sort of looking for some more ideas, I saw things like, rehome. There's all kinds of re's you can use that are related to zero waste. So Amanda's going to start us off by talking about what do we mean by zero waste, what is our role as individuals, and then we're going to go into each of these 6 or 7 R's, and we'll end with how you can figure out what's a good zero waste swap, and we might have a few suggestions for you. So here we go.
All right. So what is zero waste? So zero waste has a lot of different definitions, and people have used a lot of different terms to talk about it. But the main goal of zero waste is to stop all the negative impacts of waste disposal to living things, including us, people, plants, animals, the planet in general. And this goes beyond, as I was saying, composting and recycling. And we're going to give you some tips on that later on. So typically zero waste means 90% diversion from materials from the landfill. This is a Zero Waste International Alliance term, but other people have also used that as a way of categorized, how much waste is zero waste. And it's one thing we are going to acknowledge is that it's not only an individual problem. Zero waste is, in order to be zero waste, it's very important that manufacturers are designing products so that the least amount of waste is produced, and it's easy for people to kind of make those end-of-life decisions at the end. And also it's important that there's government responsibility in creating legislation to give incentives for people to produce less waste. So we're going to focus on the community responsibility and individual actions in this webinar, but we are acknowledging that it's not the only important part of this. All right, so just briefly, we're going to talk about, I'm just going to talk about how we really need to rethink this entire thing. So currently what we have and what we've had in the last couple of centuries is a linear economy, or it's sometimes called a open loop economy. And that's where we extract all of the materials to make things, and then we manufacture them typically both in a really energy intensive and polluting way. And then they're distributed all over the world, which takes a lot of gas and energy, and then people use them, and a lot of the responsibility on how to responsibly dispose of things is put on to us as consumers, and it still is, but without that kind of design and kind of that balance and structure around it, it's really difficult for us to make the right decisions. So most of the products that are made are disposed of either by incinerating them or just putting them in the landfill, and that means that those resources that were in those products can never be used again. So instead, we're trying to move it towards a circular economy or a closed loop economy. as it might be called. And that's where products are designed so that they're easy to reuse or recycle, and then hopefully distributed a little bit more locally. But even if it's not, you know, the carbon aspect of it is thought of, and then it's easy for people to take them, recycle them, and then send them to be recovered and to put into more products. All right, so we're just going to briefly talk about some of the consequences of waste that have occurred throughout history and what are happening now. So a lot of waste is produced in the United States each year. It was 146.1 million tons of waste in 2018, and those are the most current numbers from the EPA. And that's about 4.9 pounds per person, which if you think about it is about the size of a Chihuahua actually. So that's a good little, you know, so we throw that away every day. And then a lot of waste either ends up in the landfill where it's really compacted down, and that releases methane gas, which is a gas that's really a lot more potent than CO2, and that ends up in the atmosphere, contributes to climate change. And then also a lot of waste that doesn't end up in landfills or incinerated does kind of drift off and can end up in the waterways, and that's become a really major problem. All right, so now Sandra's going to start talking about how we can manage that.
I just want to also point out, in Vermont, 30% or about a third of our trash is ends up in the land. I mean, sorry, the third of the landfill trash is disposable packaging. And if you think that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about is how you can avoid even using disposables. So that's a huge number, that 30%. And that's just our little Vermont, where a lot of people are really careful about that kind of thing. So when you're starting to think about going zero waste, you know, when we go through those 6 or 7 R's that we talked about, we put rethink at the top of the list. And the reason for that is because you know, the linear economy versus circular economy that Amanda talked about, that's like a whole different way to think about how things work. So, and right now we are in a linear economy. So if you're thinking about how you manage your trash and waste, and, you know, you need to rethink it in terms of how do I avoid waste? What am I wasting? What do I have? And that rethinking is sort of always there in the background as you go through this process. So this is an image of a waste audit that Amanda did in her home. So this is the trash from, what was it, a week, Amanda?
It was like 2 weeks.
2 weeks of trash for 1 or 2 people. And so, but what she did was she just went through her trash, separated out the actual trash from the organics, which I think she was already separating out, recyclables. And then now Amanda has a picture of what does she use a lot of, what could she use less of, what changes could she make in her life based on what she's regularly throwing out. Like I'm not going to pick on you, Amanda, but I see things like a bunch of plastic bags. We all get those. A styrofoam cup, maybe Amanda, and we all get those. But maybe if you see a large number of something in your trash, that could be your first goal for reducing or eliminating that item. And I think those disposable coffee cups is a really good place to start. So yeah, think about what your goal is. Maybe you start with one thing instead of immediately saying, I'm going to be 100% zero waste for the rest of my life. Maybe there's one thing you can cut out or change. And remember, you know you best. So whatever we say here, we're talking in generalizations. So you think about what works best for you. Maybe reducing your waste works best for you, but not eliminating it. Maybe cutting down on things you use works, but sometimes you have to have that coffee at Starbucks every morning, or whatever the thing is that really you need in your life. So no judgments. The next R is refuse, and this kind of goes along with rethink. This is where you're not even cutting down on waste, you're just saying no to things you don't need, and that's part of rethinking. So you get all these catalogs in the mail, go to catalogchoice.org and check off the catalogs you don't want anymore. I just did that recently and it does work. And there used to be a phone number you can call, but I like this website. Avoid disposables, easier said than done. We are aware, that's why we have this whole webinar about it. But one way to avoid disposables is to make your own coffee and to bring it in a reusable, travel mug. every day when you're going to work or when you're starting your day. Another way is to bring your cloth bags instead of plastic, which we have to do in Vermont anyway because of the plastic bag ban. I like these little utensil kits. This is the one I have that Amanda put in the slide down here. You need to have this exact kit. You could take some silverware from your silverware drawer and wrap it in a napkin, but I keep this in my backpack. So if I get stuck out somewhere, at least I can just use reusable silverware or flatware instead of plastic. Another tip for refusing waste is just think of it the same way you might as a budget, where you give yourself a little waiting period before you buy something new. I usually, if I install a waiting period for myself, I usually end up not buying the thing. I think there's only a few things that we really need or we're planning on buying. A lot of impulse purchases can be avoided that way, but you all know that the waiting period in this case, the avoiding the purchase in this case would be avoiding the packaging and the waste related to the purchase. So setting that waiting period and maybe in that waiting period, you decide you can find it a good quality replacement for what you're looking for used online or in a shop locally. This is another thing we wanted to add this because part of refusing waste is having sometimes hard conversations with people you really care about and love, who in their well-meaning way may inundate you with junk or just a bunch of disposables. And it could be like, in my case, I have my brother, or not my brother, but somebody in my life used to, give us things that were, fall apart and break really easily. And, sometimes you don't want to have that conversation. But if you're having a party and you don't want your mother-in-law to bring a bunch of plastic disposableware, you can have that conversation ahead of time and start telling people what you're doing and ask them to, set some boundaries around what you want to accept in your house and not. And this is, again, so this might not be the right thing for everybody. And also, I just want to say, don't refuse guilt. It's okay if this is imperfect. Reducing is also, you hear, that's one we all are familiar with in the 3 R's, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle. Reducing is right up there with refusing in terms of reduce your waste, reduce the amount of materials that, ultimately you need to find an outlet for at the end of their life. So then you don't have to deal with them. And I love this image. This is something Amanda found at a dermatologist. I believe it was like a dermatologist account on Instagram. And what I love about it is it's so simple, especially for like products. Just read the package directions. You'd be amazed at how little you need of products. These little dollops are a really good example of, you can, if you're reducing the amount of the material you use, then you're reducing the number of packages that it comes in. And then you're reducing the amount of waste you generate. So these are examples of, shampoo, toothpaste, laundry soap, all of those. It's actually astounding how little you need of it. My big revelation was laundry soap a few years ago when I learned that you really only need about a tablespoon, maybe 2 of laundry soap in your laundry. And I'd always been pouring in like a half a cup. You don't need it and it's not good for your clothes. So just read the instructions on your packages. Shopping for what you need. I feel like we might be giving you information you already have, but this is one that it's always good to remember. And even though I strive toward this kind of a lifestyle, I always slip up with the impulse shopping. That means, for me, if something's on sale for a really great price, that doesn't actually save me money or make sense to buy if I have to buy a huge quantity in order to get the sale. So you might be better off not shopping the sales if it means you're going to have like 10 pounds of hamburger that's going to be in the freezer for 2 years or whatever the thing is. And then you save your money, you save the wasted food and packaging. Using all parts of your food, that's a whole topic in and of itself. The state of Vermont does an amazing job with their scrap food waste campaign. There's so many ideas out on, recipes you can find for things like stems, peels, stale chips and bread. pretty much, bones. I'm not going to go into detail because it's like we could just talk about that for hours, but just start thinking about all of the food as edible, not just like, you have the broccoli. Yes, we all love the head the best, but there's a whole stem there that's not only edible, but delicious. I'm going to skip going into detail about avoiding impulse purchases. That's what that waiting period idea was about. And of course, like a key part of zero waste is that when you need to get rid of something, or conversely if you have an item you need to buy, start by looking for secondhand. So either donate or sell an item before you would recycle it or throw it away. And when you need something new, like in my case, I've been looking for a blender for a while. Look for a secondhand first. And later on, we'll talk about another way of zero waste shopping. If you can't find the item that you're looking for, the quality or the style that you want secondhand, buying new with an eye toward durability and repair. But we have a whole slide about that later.
All right, so I'm just going to go through some tips on how you can start shopping and reducing waste. So one of the first things to do is always, try to make that list. And it's easier said than done, but always try to shop with a list. And we're focusing towards grocery shopping right here, but I know that also, if I'm trying to shop for particular clothing or different things that I need, it's much easier to shop secondhand if you have a list of things that you already need. So you have your eye out for it when you find it. You might not always find it as easily as you would if you were just going out and shopping at a regular store. And then when you're grocery shopping, one thing that is almost always available without packaging is produce. You walk into a grocery store and a lot of times you just see like walls of boxes and jars and plastic containers, and in the grocery store there's typically that wall with all of the prepackaged salads and stuff and like that are all in plastic packages, but typically there's another wall that has pretty much everything packaged free or in a lot less packaging. So that's always a good option, and that's not always available, but it almost always is. And then find your local bulk bins if possible. So a lot of times, especially in Vermont, we have co-ops or health food stores, or sometimes even larger grocery stores will have bulk bins that have just staples like rice or oats or beans. And you're able to take a baggie or a jar that you bring with you, fill it up with those staple products. Or if you're lucky to have an even larger one, you can get things like snacks and nuts and all sorts of other things and go bulk. But that's a really good way to buy food with as little waste as possible. And then also shop local when you can. So buying things at farmers markets from local artisans is a great way, or local farmers, to get things that are either package free or, devil's advocate, at least you're getting it with a lot less carbon dioxide emissions when it's getting sent to you locally, instead of being sent away, thousands and thousands of miles away. And then if you can't have any of those options, try to buy things that are either in paper or metal packaging or glass packaging, because it's much easier and there's a lot more outlets for recycling of those types of packaging. And you can also reuse those packages a lot easier. And then just kind of a step up from that, if you want to go beyond, you can start gardening by yourself a little bit. If you're growing your own produce, it'll make it so that you're not creating that waste when you're growing those things by yourself, and it also is a good hobby and it makes you feel good about the things that you're buying. And you can also, if you have the time, make your own sauces and breads and cookies and all sorts of different things. Because if you think about it, typically, especially when you're making things like breads and that kind of things, a big bag of flour and things like that come in just paper packaging. That a lot of times bread comes in a plastic bag or cookies come in a plastic tray. So if you have the time, you can make your own things. And then also, I'm just gonna mention how you can choose a sustainable brand. So when you're shopping for these bigger items and you have to buy things new, a lot of times a sustainable brand is something that's producing things ethically and also environmentally sustainably. And it can be really hard to realize what those are. And there's a lot of companies that might say that they're really green, but they're not. And it's hard to determine whether or not your product is actually being produced in an environmentally sustainable way. And a good way to figure that out is to see if they're third-party certified. So B Corps, for instance, that's a way that sort of a third party can go in and look at the supply chain and everything and figure out whether or not they're being produced sustainably and ethically. And 1% of the Planet is a third party that allows companies to put 1% of their profits towards environmental causes. Then reuse. So reusing is something that we always say is an important step in zero waste. So if you're going to go bulk shopping, try to use reused jars. You know, they might not be the most aesthetically pleasing in the whole world, but if you have an old pickle jar or an old pasta jar, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, canning jars are always a good use, but clean them out, and that's what you can use for your bulk shopping, or for keeping plants, or propagating plants, or lots of different uses for glass jars. Or think a little bit outside of the box, and the one picture at the bottom is someone that's used a bunch of cans as planters. And then there's other bigger repurposing ideas. So the one in the bottom with the bricks that are made out of glass bottles, that was a place that I went to that builds homes, and they make these interior walls out of these two bottles that they saw off the top, and they stick them together, and it makes a brick, and it makes these really lovely like mosaic walls. So there's lots of ways that you can kind of repurpose items that you might otherwise recycle or throw away. And then swapping for disposables. So there's lots of items that last a lot longer than they would than the disposables that we've kind of become accustomed to. We're going to talk about that, but always use up the products that you already have before you go and buy something new and think of a swap. So how are you going to look for these swaps that you're going to maybe be buying? So I've created kind of a thought bubble over here about what you should think about when you're trying to choose a swap. So are you going to use that swap if you buy it is the first thing. There's lots and lots of different ideas for zero waste swaps. You can Google it and you can find a whole list of 30 plus swaps for things around your home. And we will be discussing some of those. But some of them are things that, you didn't have the problem to begin with. So do you really need to buy a swap for it? And then again, can you buy something secondhand before you can buy it, before buying it new? Is the product that you're buying being produced in an ethical and sustainable way? And when you're going to be disposing of it down the line, what's the end of life of it? Does it have packaging that's being made out of compostable materials or easily recyclable materials? These are all things to think of. And buying quality over quantity. So for instance, I bought myself a leaf safety razor about a year ago, and this was a big kind of expensive purchase for me, but it's going to replace years and years and years and years of disposable cartridge razors, because all that I need for this one is just 10-cent razor blades that I put in it, and I think over time I'm thinking about it as an investment piece. So it might cost you a little bit more upfront, but over time it should save you money. And then think about what your grandparents might buy. So a lot of times we might think of the new shiny things that we see in the stores, but sometimes, maybe if you need an egg beater, but you don't really use the egg beater a whole lot, you could buy yourself a manual one, and that would not only cut down on energy, but you can normally find them secondhand. And that's a good zero waste swap. It's kind of thinking outside the box and buying products that might be thought of as old fashioned, but actually can save you a lot of waste down the line.
When you talk about this, Amanda, what comes to mind for me is cloth diapers. Way back, I don't want to say how long ago, but well, two of my kids are adults now, so you get the idea. I was costing out the difference between using cloth diapers over disposables. I ended up with a hybrid. I'd use cloth diapers most of the time, but if I had to be out and about, I carried some disposables with me. But the savings was ridiculous. It was like and that was back in the early 2000s, saving over $3,500 over the period of time that you're diapering your kid versus buying, versus an upfront cost that was around $100, which was a lot more then than it is now. So there's all kinds of things like that it saves you money and reduces waste over time, but you have to put a little money in up front. Okay, oops, I got my cursor off here. Also, I sent I sent you a chat. We are live on Facebook right now. So while I'm presenting, Amanda's going to check in on Facebook and see if anybody has a question or a comment there. So these are some images that we actually had in our older version of the slideshow, and I added them back in just to kind of show some ideas about the kinds of swaps we're talking about. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. It's just to give you some ideas. There's pretty much a swap for everything, with some exceptions, obviously, but you can see like in the kitchen, the obvious things we probably all have heard of: cloth shopping bags, cloth napkins. Not everybody knows about reusable produce bags, but that's a really nice option for when you're buying that produce that comes with no packaging in the grocery store. Yeah, there's a great example. That looks like a net bag. Is that a net?
Yeah, it's just like a net cloth.
Yeah, yep. They look a little different than your regular shopping bag because you need, a little breathability for the produce sometimes. But there's all kinds of things like the metal lunchbox, hand coffee grinder, cloth bowl cover. Bees wrap is a great example of that. And then going into the bathroom, same thing. There's just pretty much everything you have that's disposable, you can find a non-disposable option. And sometimes you can't if it's out of your budget. But if you have the money to make a small investment or even a bigger investment like Amanda's razor, you actually save a lot of waste and real money over time. So the next thing we're going to talk about is repair. And this is what Amanda kind of referred earlier to buying quality over quantity. And I talked earlier about like getting something durable versus disposable. But another factor, we all have things we have to bring into our lives, right? Whatever that is, a stand mixer, a car, clothing. So one of the sort of rethinking aspects of moving your life towards zero waste is thinking about the repairability of an item before you purchase it. So sometimes used items are much more, have more repairability than new items because so many new items are being sold so you can't open them, or so that there's no repair manual with it. And there are some, like John Deere, Tesla, Apple, those are all like companies that are sort of notorious for making it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to repair items. So if you're purchasing things, think about, okay, this thing is going to wear out or break eventually. So you're not only looking for quality, but you're also looking at how can it be repaired. So does the back open up so I can get into it myself? Is it fairly simple or is it complex? And are there people in my area that can fix it? Those are some of the things you might think about. And this is a great example of like a shoe with a sewn on sole instead of glued on. And also, do you have a shoe repair person in your area? We're really, really lucky in Central Vermont because we have Boyvaers, which is a family-owned shoe repair place. The other thing about repair is not to be afraid of it. We're not all repair people. Most of us know someone who fixes things in our lives, but I'm not a repair person, and I used to be intimidated by it. But a few years ago, I started organizing repair cafes in Central Vermont. And we had some Eco-AmeriCorps people like Amanda who helped out with that and really made it possible. And this photo down on the bottom left is from our first repair cafe at a church in Barrie. And those are a couple of our fixers. And I'm not going to go into all the details about how it works, but one of the relevant things about a repair cafe is that when you go in you bring your broken item, and when you go in, you get set up with somebody who has the skills to fix it. And you don't just drop it off and walk away like you would at a repair shop. You sit with that person, and when they're fixing it, they might invite you to say, take off the screws of this part. You can do things that you know how to do, and then they'll work on the more complicated part. But when I had a phone that I got fixed. And the thing I saw that struck me that I could do is the first thing these experienced repair people did was they Googled it. They went on to like iFixit.com or ereplacementparts.com to see if the parts are available. iFixit has, just a clearinghouse of manuals, the kind of manuals that some manufacturers try to keep from regular consumers. So I was like, I can Google that. So now when I have a broken item, I will look it up and find out, is there a replacement part? Can I do this myself? Find a YouTube video. It's already broken. The worst thing you can do is keep it broken, right? So yeah, if you find a repair cafe or start one in your area, that's a really great place to get more comfortable with repairing things. And we actually do still have on our website, cvswmd.com. It's cvswmd.org. We have zero waste under our zero waste section. We have repair cafe, some repair cafe pages, even though we're not holding them anymore. So we have the whole template of how you could start your own repair cafe right on the website. The other thing around repair is actually, unfortunately, shouldn't be, but is a political issue, because so many major manufacturers go out of their way to create products or obscure repairability or make them so only they can repair them. And I told you a few of the ones that I know of, but there's many, many more. So the iFixit.com is involved with this right to repair legislation that has been introduced in about a dozen states around the country, including here in Vermont. And it essentially, if it's passed, guarantees that, say you buy a computer, you have the repair manual and the instructions for how to open it and that kind of thing. So just check and see if you have that in your state. If you're here in Vermont, pay attention to when it comes back around. It's pretty important. So recycle and rot, that's recycling and composting. And that's also a key part of zero waste, but we didn't put that up front because zero waste means you're not creating waste. And recycling and rot and composting are waste, but they're both things that sort of get when in the case of recycling, remanufactured and or just kind of recycled back into the world. So we chose not to go into depth about those two subjects in this webinar because we already have webinars only about recycling, and we have a webinar only about composting. And after this one, we're going to send you guys who are signed up, you'll get a link to our YouTube channel, VT Zero Waste, and we have all those webinars posted up there. So we just want to say a couple things about each. First of all, when you get to the point where you do have some materials that need recycling, the best thing you can do to make sure it gets recycled is find out what goes in the bin and what stays out. That if you put things that you wish were recycled but aren't on the list of what goes in, all you're doing is creating contamination that makes it difficult to recycle things properly. So even if you wish it were recyclable, don't put it in the bin if it's not on your list. That's the most important thing to know about recycling. Composting, again, we have all kinds of information on our website, cvswmd.org, and also on our recorded webinars on our YouTube channel. But the bottom line about recycling is it does reduce landfill emissions. You're keeping food scraps out of the landfill, which reduces the generation of methane in the landfill, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas that Amanda talked about earlier. Also, if you're composting your food scraps at your home, you're keeping the nutrients and fertility in the soil right in your yard. You're not giving that away to someone else. That's great if you're a gardener, and even if you're not a gardener, it's still good for the soil around your property. But there's other ways to make sure your food scraps are composted, even if it's not on your property. And we have all of that on our website. The only other thing we wanted to say about composting is just reduce your food waste first and think about that before you're composting.
Right, so just a few issues with zero waste, because zero waste has become something that's maybe a little bit political or a little bit just kind of ostracizing sometimes. And we're just going to talk about some of the issues that you are involved with. So one thing is that zero waste is not always easily accessible to everyone. It is a privilege. So there is sometimes a bit of an upfront cost to it. Maybe, maybe you're a single mother and you've got 5 kids and you have no time and you don't have the time to think about whether or not you can make your own bread and save that waste by making bread, or going out to 3 different grocery stores and trying to find things that are packaged in as little waste as possible. That might not be an option for you. Or there's some upfront costs, as we mentioned before, that some swaps can be a little bit more expensive and a little bit out of your budget to begin with, and that might take you some time to maybe save up, or maybe you're going to have things in your life that you need to spend money on before you do that. So there are a lot of privileges around it, and there's this famous idea of the trash jar where everyone can fit everything into everything from either a year or multiple years that can't go in the recycling or their compost all in one little mason jar. And for some people, maybe that is attainable, especially if most of the people that I've seen that do this are like 20-year-olds living in Brooklyn, and they have a lot of resources around them, and that's great. And maybe they do have the resources and the money to do it. And if you do too, that's that's fantastic. But for everyone, that's just not an option. And then other priorities. So a lot of times, if you're a vegan and you're trying to buy meat-free options, they come in plastic in the freezer section and they don't come in anything else. And that's more of a priority to you than not producing a little bit less waste. Or maybe you have a medical condition and you produce a lot of plastic with that. There are other priorities, and that's totally fine. And then greenwashing. So greenwashing is, because eco-friendly and green has kind of become a buzzword, there's some people that will make this impression that their product is so green and so environmentally sustainable, but it's not really true. Words like green, eco-friendly, earth-friendly, et cetera, are not managed by anyone. Anyone can put those on their packaging. So you have to kind of take some things with a grain of salt and be a little bit wary of things that maybe seem too good to be true, because sometimes they are. And I just wanted to mention briefly that this idea of repurposing things and sending things back to manufacturers and all that are not a new concept. In fact, Coca-Cola, which is one of the companies now that create the most amount of waste, used to some capacity, take glass bottles and have them sent back to them so that they could refill them. And they did this to some level, even up until 2012, I believe, is when they did it last. And that's where that photo's from. So individual behavior is hugely important, and that's what we're discussing here, but it is only one part of the picture if we want to really become zero waste countrywide and worldwide. And just to conclude, so as we were discussing, zero waste does not happen overnight, but if you think about things and you put a little bit of time and effort in and use some of the tips that we've given here, you can reduce your waste. And choosing where to put your money is a really powerful tool, because if you're not buying things that have tons of packaging, and you're sending emails maybe to the company that says, I love your product, but it comes in 5 different plastic bags, and I would prefer not to make those, you might have an impact, and they might start producing less packaging with their products. And it is more important for many people to do zero waste imperfectly than it is for a few people to create no waste at all. So it's more important for a lot of people to start cutting down on their waste than for a few people to have all of their waste in one mason jar for an entirety of 3 years. All right, and that's it. We'll conclude.
Well said, Amanda. I like that ending note. Do we have any questions? Did you see any questions on our Facebook feed?
I did not.
Okay, and we've got a few people logged on here If you have any questions, we've got a chat box and a Q&A box, and we'll stay on for a few minutes. And while we're sort of waiting to see if anybody has questions, Amanda, let me ask you a question. What's your favorite, like, zero waste swap? Like the thing you use the most that you just really like?
There's a couple things. So my main area that I've swapped the most in my life is in the bathroom. So, and it's really kind of intriguing because you can find swaps for most of the bits of plastic that you have in the bathroom. So for instance, I've been using these like little toothpaste tablets for a while now that are just like these little pills that you chew on and they foam up a little bit and then you can use them as toothpaste, and they come to you in this jar and then they send them to you in this compostable paper bag, and that's a great swap that I've been using for 3 or 4 months now. I
So
really
how much does one of those cost?
I think the refills are like $10 to $12. And then up front, I think it's closer to like 20.
Okay.
But yeah, this jar lasts like 3 to 4 months. So
Okay, yeah.
yeah. So, you know, it's a little bit upfront and it's a little weird to begin with because it's not quite like toothpaste, but I do enjoy that. But you can also find toothpaste that's in like aluminum packaging. So that's another good opportunity. And then also deodorant now comes in like all of these little like cardboard tubes, which is great. And you can, there are some conventional brands that are actually doing that now too. So
Cool.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite little gizmos. It's just a straw. This is the one we sell these, full disclosure, but it doesn't matter. You don't need to get it from us. But I like because the straw comes with a little cleaning brush. And I actually keep extra straws in my car because sometimes I do get like an iced coffee or something. And I as much as possible, don't want to use a straw. So
yeah.
it feels like when I think about a straw, it doesn't feel like a super impactful thing because it's so little, but it's just one little piece of a much bigger picture.
Yeah, for a long time I had a straw like just tucked in like my little utensils
Oh,
kit.
that's a good idea. And it's right there.
I think I must be washing it right now. It's not in there right now.
Yeah. Do you yeah. Okay. Do you how do you clean it out? Like if you're out and about and you've used it, do you have a strategy?
If I'm out and about and I've used it, I try to just like rinse something off and then clean it better when I get home.
Yeah. Okay.
But, yeah.
Well, listen, I'm not seeing any questions, so I think we're gonna log off. We're done.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Amanda.
Yeah. Thank you. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.